Good evening, folks, and welcome back to the Four Lads Had a Dream podcast network. Tonight is the all-important review of the annual general meetings that happened in Glasgow at the Armadillo this morning. I, I'm actually happy that we've made it to 8 o'clock tonight, as I was worried based on how maybe we've been feeling the last few months, how it would go. But we're here, and I'd say in probably a brighter way, more brighter than I was expected. With me tonight, I've got a star-studded cast. Firstly, my good pal from the Sunday show, Calvin. How are you, mate?
Mate, all good. All good, mate. Can you hear me now, mate? It seems to be
I can hear
freezing
you now.
up a wee bit
I can
there.
hear you now.
All good.
Yeah, yeah. It's good to have you on this evening, mate, and also a man in the know in terms of maybe making me feel a bit more reassured about the financial side of our football club. Andy, how are you tonight?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Good to be on. It was an interesting day anyway. Plenty to discuss, and I'm sure we'll get into all as we go through tonight.
Yeah, lots to discuss, as always with Rangers. It's one thing we can always thank them for, having a lot to talk about. Um, just lastly, before we crack on with today's discussion, just a quick thank you to our sponsors. You'll see them down the bottom of your screen. Rhino Express, Clayview Joinery, Athol Industrial Solutions, CSD Air Conditioning, Black Rooster, and Art of Gold. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Right, as I said, getting to 8 o'clock tonight, I'm a lot more positive than I was maybe feeling pre-AGM. I think that the Rangers camp has been split for a long time this season, but how were your feelings going into this morning? I'll start with you, Andy. What was your pre-AGM thoughts?
I think it could have went one of two ways. I think you get the usual nonsense questions where people are asking about pies and tickets, or it could have been quite toxic actually. The result last night, I think, probably helped. I think if we'd dropped points last night, for example, it'd have been a very different mood going into the AGM. I think as it turned out, it was quite mild. It was
See if I can Andy back. Yeah, I think as he was quoted, I was going to say there, uh, it was never actually as feisty as it was going to appear to be, which is good. I actually was happy that the level-headedness kicked in. Calvin, I'll come to you whilst Andy's recovering. What was your kind of feelings going into it? Because as Andy said, I think it could have went one of two ways. I think I was leaning more to a feistier side because there's been a lot of, I don't want to say mismanagement. I don't say it as that. I think it's not been the greatest of seasons so far, and certainly if there was you know a negative point to go around, it was probably going to be brought up today, but it didn't seem to be the case. You hear me, Calvin?
I can't hear you. Mate. See that one again? It just kind of froze there when you were talking.
Oh, sorry, mate. Just on what was Andy was saying there about it could have gone one of two ways today. Um, I personally was leaning towards the more negative side, but it wasn't the case, thankfully, and I think it was actually probably a positive day overall. I lost Calvin. I'll see if he'll come back in with us. Um, I'll come back to you, Andy, if you're with me, because I'm
still here, still here.
that's good. That's good. You know, so as you were saying, obviously it could have gone two ways. I think we knew how it was going to play out. We're going to get some information, and then we're going to open up to the floor. We got our interim chairman opening the day's proceedings. I think it was exactly what I was expecting to hear from him, obviously emphasising how much of an honour and a privilege it was for him to be in the position for the AGM. Wherewith it's obviously going to be his first and last, obviously, as the interim chairman. But kind of giving us the overview on the challenging period of time it's been whilst he's been at the helm. Obviously, the circumstances leading him to the position, kind of giving an overview of the previous CEO position with James Bisgrove, and kind of introducing who else was on the stage with him. Were you expecting, anything more than you were getting from John today? Obviously, you were there. He was quick to also make the apologies quickly to the fans, obviously, for some of the challenges we've had this season, as we'll get into. But I think he said everything he had to say today.
Yeah, I think having John there probably helped the board as well as the fans. I think, we recognise him as being one of us. He's down to earth, and I think he could speak like that as well. He could be quite honest and hold his hands up and apologise for the Copeland Road works and some of the delays that we've had to endure this season, and just for it being a difficult period since the last AGM on the park. So I think the fact that he was able to be honest, speak as a fan as well as the chairman of the club, I think was quite helpful. I think it kind of kept the mood quite civilised. I don't think there was anybody going to really have a go at him for what he was saying. So, I mean, the chairman's statement's fairly bland and straightforward. A few introductions and platitudes and everything else. And, I think most of the stuff came a bit later. The one thing I think he did give away was, of course, that the board was going to go under some restructuring. I think that was probably the biggest takeaway, at least as we look to the future. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we go on anyway.
Yep, I've got this. You were there obviously today. I wasn't, unfortunately, tied up at work, or I would have made the trip down. I've got it down quite early as obviously starting the discussion with the Copeland Road works, the Copeland Standard debacle, as I had it down. But we're now in a position where it's been in past. We've played the games we had to play at Hampden. Obviously at the time, a very big issue and a lot of unhappy fans, and rightly so. But I suspected all along there would be an element of Rangers acting on the advice of advisors in this situation when it came to the works that were going to go on, safety stewards and building managers, and I was expecting to hear that today. I think as he did state that's they just acted on what they were told, but they were quick to also mention that these works would then there would be more plans in place for the remaining two other stands that we're going to be looking to make similar changes to or updates to in the future. Going ahead, I was interested to see. Obviously, I wasn't there. If there would be any kind of reaction to that, because obviously we've seen this year when it doesn't work, we can have these major delays. What do you think that the kind of overall support opinion will be on the works that may potentially be ahead for the remaining stands?
Interestingly, I think one of the things that came out of the day is that perhaps that's something that might not go ahead. I think we've heard noises before from, I think it was John Gilligan, and it sort of emphasised that today along with James Taylor, that if we were to undertake these sort of works again, I think he said they wouldn't be in the close season. So that makes it very difficult when you're going to do it. And the cost of this season has been a lot higher than I'm sure they would have liked it to have been. I think in the accounts it said that they would contracted to costs for stadium improvements of 3.85 million. So that's presumably the Copeland Road works in the summer. But that doesn't factor in the additional costs that we suffered, such as having to hire Hampden, loss of ticket sales. You could then throw in potentially losing to Dynamo Kiev, a game we might not have lost had it been at Ibrox. And suddenly you're looking at a potential 10 million, impact into this current season. Some of which you'd always incur anyway, some of it due to the mistakes that we made, and that's the avoidable part. And I don't know, I think some of the soundings that we've had from the board and from John Gilligan is that they might not go ahead with us going forward because it's just such a huge task. In fact, I think James Taylor would call it an overly ambitious project to undertake. So I think there'll be serious consideration to that going forward as to whether it's something they really want to be doing again or whether it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it was probably the highest. I'm gonna say probably highest priority up on the top of the list because it was such a monumental thing. You know, the start of our season incredibly disrupted. As you say, the knock on the 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 extra financial kind of penalties we faced from it. Kiev being one of those. I'm in that camp where I think, you know, Ibrox in the Champions League qualifier, you know, we get a different kind of feeling in our home stadium, and we know how massive the missing out on Champions League revenue can be. I'll bring Calvin back now. Yeah, he's
There we
back
go.
with us
Hopefully that's
just
it this
in
time.
just in time. We were just mentioning obviously the whole. I have it down as debacle, but I don't want to use that word anymore because we're now past it. But obviously Andy mentioning that it could obviously influence our decision making when it comes to doing it again in the future with the remaining stands that were planned. Calvin, if it were to go ahead in the future, how much scrutiny do you think that would be placed upon those in charge, whoever it may be, obviously with what we're going to mention, um, over having to keep such a close eye on the process again and hopefully not ending up in the same situation?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. Like, it caused so much disruption this year in terms of how we performed in the park. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of pressure. The fans were applying pressure. So when it comes to doing it again, if it does go ahead again, that 6 weeks window they give them is very, very tight. So is it something they need to look at doing in stages? So it's not just put into place and rattled out, and then we go back into a situation where you're back at Hampden or elsewhere. I think that's the big thing. It's needs to be done right and right for the team, and doesn't just pull everything else out apart.
As we kind of alluded to, with people in charge who may be undertaking that stand kind of upgrade, as we've seen this year. We don't know who. Well, we may have a slight inkling of as to who would be in charge and who would be overseeing it, but the restructuring of the board, Andy, was one of the major headlines of today. I don't want to say there was an admission that their period of effectiveness as the current standing board members is kind of coming towards an end. I don't think there was a straight out yes or no to that. I think there was one of the Q&A questions mentioning their performance, but an understanding that things were going to change and this was the right direction for them to go. Mentioning obviously the re-election will be an interesting thing for the members. What's your take on how that can, you know, have us looking from the non-playing side of the business, starting from this time next year?
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe the last throw of the dice I think they've got because they've tried doing things themselves, whether that's Dave King, Douglas Park, John Bennett. You know, they've all had a go at it. We've had shareholder board members effectively running the club. You know, it's a bit of a bowling club mentality, I think, when it's, well, I've put my money in, so I'm going to have my say. And I think they're now moving towards a more professional approach. You know, I think it's something a lot of us have wanted for a while, where you're actually appointing guys with experience in certain industries or, you know, to come in and run it in your behalf. So today I think they've announced they're going to have an independent non-exec chairman coming in. That'll be announced in the next few weeks. There's then going to be 2 non-exec directors appointed, so they're not day-to-day, but they'll be independent as well. That's outside guys coming in, not shareholders. And then there'll be 2 exec directors, so they're more day-to-day, and they'll be coming in as well to sort of bolster the board and bring the executive team, I think, a bit closer to the board, basically. So that's the plan. But it all hinges on whether they get the right appointments, and that's what it's going to come down to. We know already we've got Patrick Stewart coming in, starting after the League Cup final. The chairman, we don't know yet. There's been names mentioned, but it's supposed to be announced in the next few weeks. And then the other ones will be interesting. But I think it's now time for these guys to take a back seat. If they need to put their money in to fund certain things, then do it. But give the guys that they're appointing to run the club the autonomy to run things their way, to use their experience and their knowledge to run the football club. And ultimately, if they don't do that, they'll be removed, whether it's the chief executive or whoever. They'll be removed from position and somebody else will be put in. So give them the sort of room and the space to do it their way, because clearly having shareholders, everybody putting their tuppence worth in, it just hasn't served us well at all. And we really need to reverse this downward trend and start moving forward again, not just on the pitch, but off it as well.
I'll come to you both on the next point. I'll come back to you, obviously, Andy, on it as well. So one of the key things I believe was mentioned was a kind of west of Scotland contingent in terms of investment coming in, investors. I was interested when I read it. I think it's something that you can hear off of guys on supporters buses. Oh, you need more of the blue noses on the board, and I think at the time when you're on these buses, you go, "Aye, cool, that's all well and good." But genuinely, I think, given where we are at the moment, Calvin, I think it would honestly do us no harm, especially when we're crying out for investors who are willing to, I don't want to say come to our aid, but would be interested in helping out the club, and having them being on the ground, local. I think even today a couple of the board members were not present, so in itself would be would be more handy to have them closer to home. What's your thoughts on the local contingent of potential investors?
I think when it comes in terms of that, it's just having the best men for the job. Like, we're trying to get past this jobs for the boys mentality. It seems to have been for the past 10 years. It's always just one steps up, the next one goes in and replaces them. So as long as these investors are the best men for the job and they're able to fund it the right way and bring the right ideas to the table and create that mentality, I think that's the biggest thing. We've lost that kind of mentality of we need to be the winners. And it's not just chucking money at the dartboard and hoping for the best. So that's what I think it needs to be. It needs to be somebody that's got a direct plan, they know what they're looking to do, and they can bring it to us, rather than just the next one steps up, next one steps down.
Yeah, it's a good point. Obviously, we have mentioned the has been guys who are pretty close to the club. They are previously, Andy, but I don't know if it's needing a fresh group, instead of kind of a rotation of figureheads that we've seen previously. Just some fresh ideas and just an overall, I don't want to say clean slate, but as close to it as you can get without losing the overall kind of cohesion that's already kind of existing at the club.
Yeah, I was a wee bit surprised with sort of West of Scotland focus, as it's not really something that I thought was an absolute necessity. I mean, the guys running the club, they're now a Rangers fan. They know the West of Scotland. They know Rangers. I don't think it does any harm to have that sort of knowledge, but we've already got a lot of that there. I think the key thing might be is having some of the independent guys in, because I think this board and this investor group in the past have been maybe a bit too close to things. I mean, we've heard from whether it's board members or investors that Ross Wilson is doing an excellent job or Stuart Robertson's doing an excellent job, and next season they're sacked and removed because it turns out they haven't been doing an excellent job. So, having somebody maybe a bit more detached from the day-to-day stuff or detached from the personalities that are involved, as you said, might just give that fresh pair of eyes, because even although we're supporters of the club, we're detached from the running of it. We're sitting in the stands going, he isn't doing a good job, or this board haven't done a good job over the last 12 months. And I think sometimes they live in a bubble and they can't see that for looking at it. So I'm hoping these are the kind of changes that will begin to remove some of that and, help take us forward, because you've got to have internal criticism as well on a board. You can't just be sitting there high-fiving and giving yourself slaps in the back when, the occasional things go right. So, yeah, but it's about getting the right guys in place as well and the right balance in the board. So I hope they can do that and really start putting a structure in place that we can take forward for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
You've mentioned they're taking it forward for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and we're going to get into transfer business. I think from looking at the comments, a lot of people I'm seeing a cash figure, and I'm sure we will mention it. But we'll do the kind of overall discussion on the way it was presented today. We had the kind of overview of the previous squads and having a kind of overall look at the playing side of the business, because I mean it's football at the end of the day. The graphic showing last season's outs: John McLaughlin, Robbie McCrory, Connor Golson, Borna Barisic, John Lundstrom, Ryan Jack, Todd Cantwell, Scott Wright, Sam Lammers, Kemar Roof. Mentions the salary cost being in around £41 million with an average age of 29.7. They've mentioned in the middle reducing the average age, normalising the wage structure and create asset value. Comparing that to the costs and ins for this season: Liam Kelly, Robin Proper, Clinton Nasiala, Naratio Casemiro, Jefty, Connor Barron, Mohamed Diamandi, Nadim Bahrami, Vaslav Cherny, Hamza Igaman. 35 million in salary cost, average age of 25.3. I think we would be lying to ourselves if we said that our transfer business has been spot on in the last few years. I think ever since those three magic words of player trading model were mentioned, I was interested in hearing what they had planned because I felt it was the right place, a right way for us to go. But it has taken its time to fully seem to bed in that this is exactly where we need to go. There can be no deviation from it. I think one of the major setbacks in that, to be completely honest, is as we've seen in the comments, £810,000 in previous returns, and we kind of on the podcast back when the books were published mentioned these kind of figures and how harrowing it is to see it. I think at the time there was maybe a lot of it can't be that. There'll be some underlying figures that we can't publish just yet, obviously with the way football is. But seeing it again in full scope, it's a slightly damning kind of sign of where we were previously. Because I'm going to say that's what it is, where we were. Because I feel like as we'll go on to with this current season's intake, that we are moving in the right direction. But it's tough to look at.
Yeah, I mean the figure of £810,000 I think was a shocking one. There was almost an inhale of breath when James Taylor confirmed that that was actually correct today, even though we've seen it in black and white. I think just hearing that was, the figure for five of these players, one of which we'd bought for about €4 million just 12 months before. I think that was, that's one of the big outcomes, and it's been one of the big focuses, I think, in the reaction to the AGM. Now, as you said, if you look back at 12, 18, 24 months, that's the kind of price we're paying for buying guys on big contracts that nobody else is going to pay them the same wages. That was effectively what happened with Sam Lammers. It's what happened with Goldson. Cantwell, similar, although he didn't want to be here, but it was the same idea that in order to get him off the books, we had to let him go for virtually nothing. So that's a kind of legacy issue with buying players on huge wages that we saw in the accounts as well. The wage bill was going up and up to the point that it just wasn't sustainable. And we're now under Niles Copeland trying to bring that back down. You spoke about the average age. The wages have dropped by 6 million from last season into the current season. So you can see where the focus is, and you can see that now playing through. Making that a success is very difficult. You've got these young raw talents, some of which have been very good, some of which might take a bit of time. We're only just starting to see Igaman coming through now and show what he can do. And you just hope in the long term these are the right moves for the club and we can build on it as we go into future windows. But yeah, the £810,000, a shocking figure really to be bringing in. If you're talking about player trading, you can't be letting 5 first team players go for under £1 million. I mean, that just sums up, I think, some of the poor decisions that we have made in the past. And in fact, we've still got players in our books that we probably can't even get rid of for £810,000, and that's part of the problem. We're still paying these guys and they're not contributing. So that's a challenge to kind of gradually phase these guys out and bring in guys who are young, hungry, on a lesser wage and can actually contribute to the first team.
Yeah, I think you're right, phasing out these kind of remaining big contract wage, hits that we are taking. That's just the way it is, because it's just we have resulted to letting these players go for virtually nothing just to get them off the wage bill. I look at, as I said, those names again. There was players who were out of contract. Kemar Roos springs to mind. I think John McLaughlin was out of his contract. Borna and Lundstrom as well. That's one of these things where that in itself can help us, but if you tie them down to long contracts at the ridiculous wages we have, then they're just going to be there, and that's just one of these things that Scotland's going to have to deal with as part of kind of navigating our team through this rebuild. But I mean, I'm trying to be positive here, looking at some of the moves. I mean, it's the salary coming down is good. I think we have brought in a couple of players who do look like they have adapted well. I do think I was discussing it earlier with my dad. The I know it's a great story, the whole Igaman with the local restaurant with the A licensed coach. I think that's a great story, but in itself, if we weren't prepared ahead of time to the fact that language is going to be an issue, that's a slightly worrying thing for the going ahead, because Calvin, I think we're now in as best as we can be, obviously taking into obviously the conversation those hangers on in terms of the longer contracts on the poor wages. We are going to be heading in that direction full steam from now on. I think we just need to focus on having the best platform at the club for these incoming players from, I don't know where it would be, Scandinavia. We've seen Morocco, young French players, Clinton Nasiala. We have to have the best, or as best as we can, have the right people in the club to help these players as they come in, because there is going to be we're not going to just pack up and leave the player trading model now. I think we're fully committed to it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of just having that support network in-house already. So just having the variety of coaches, people that have worked in the game throughout the world, and knowing that when a player comes in, they've got somebody they can lean on and give them that, if they need that extra support, extra help to settle in. We know that the Glasgow Fishbowl's an intense situation for people that have stayed in Britain as it is, and then if you're bringing somebody in totally oblivious to what it's like to live in Glasgow, especially when you're playing for a club like ours, they'd probably need that extra support ready to go. But having people, it's an experience thing. If they've done it with one player, they know exactly what it is to come. So when it comes to bringing these players in, they just need to know how to be ready to get them onto the ground running for us straight away.
Andy, I'll come back in just on the kind of individuals, the signings and so on. That we are luckily off the back of a nice positive win the other night with our young Moroccan striker, who's grabbing the hearts and minds of the Rangers support, being a pivotal signing all of a sudden. And I say all of a sudden because at times it did feel like we weren't going to see him for quite a while. I think when he came in the door, it was quite clear he was a project. I mean, we've seen the two sides of the coin. We're seeing Hamza now in the first team contributing, but we're trying not to get too carried away with it. But you've also got, and again, no disrespect, Clinton Nasiala, who's in the B team. You get, two similar profile of player, young lads from across Europe and so on, brought in on what we think is beneficial, fees and wages that we can then build up and sell for a higher profit. And you've got one who is now reaping the rewards and one who's still a while away. I think it's about now where we do genuinely have to start taking, if it's a Copeland interview or it's Clement's comments himself, that these players do take time. He's not just saying that to cover his back. We are seeing it firsthand that this is a project and it's not a short-term one with players. It's just going to be a, a process of getting them, integrated and then eventually seeing the best out of them. I think it's a tough pill to swallow because it's not ideal circumstances we're doing this in, as with the league position shows. But it's just going to have to be one of these things that we're going to have to get used to, because that's the way we're going to have to operate to find ourselves at the next level.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was a question today about that. I think it was Gail that asked, do we have to lower our expectations for a season or two while we rebuild and put in the building blocks and all that sort of stuff? And she basically begged the board, just be honest with us, tell us the truth and be upfront about it. And the manager actually answered that question himself, and he gave quite a good answer, I suppose, about the standards at Rangers. Rangers is about winning. The minute we stop doing that, we're no longer Rangers, all that sort of stuff. Big round of applause, sounds very good. But I think this season we have had to be patient. I think we could have done with maybe a bit more honesty in terms of the expectations. Clement had mentioned, it's good now that the support can see the numbers, by which he means the wage bill coming down and the age coming down. And I think that's him kind of hinting at the fact that, yeah, this is a work in progress and it is something we're building on. I'm going to try not let last night cloud my judgment too much, because it was a really good win, and we saw, I think, from some of the players what we've been waiting for, what we've been hoping for. But the season as a whole has been, really, really disappointing. If you took before last night, if you took out the Ross County game, we're averaging 1 goal a game. The football's been pretty turgid. It's been pretty boring. You've seen empty seats in the stands, those sort of things. It really hasn't been a good season. But I just hope now, there was wee glimmers last night with the likes of Jeffrey, Raskin, Barron's had a good season as well. Cherny's now discovered his form. Man's coming in, performed in Europe, showed last night domestically, I think, what he can bring to us if he gets a bit of support with maybe Danilo or somebody else round about him. And I just hope maybe the manager stumbled in something last night that can serve us well going forward, because this season we just haven't entertained. We haven't looked like scoring enough goals, and if you don't do that, you're not going to win enough games. Sitting in third in December is bad enough, but if we can see progress, as I said right at the start of the season, this season is about making progress and taking those first steps. If the fans can see something that they can buy into, if they can see the team improving and see the young players coming through, they will back them. They did it with Gerrard, and they'll do it here as well. But, we're now in December. We really need to see the fruits of that starting to come through with some of these players as we look towards the next window and towards the summer, and how we can build on top of that.
Yeah, I think it's, in terms of that kind of debate of the player trading model, it is now just a case of window to window. It's going to be looking to continue the good work we did in the summer, because I think we are seeing now that, as we are hinting to, and again, not getting too carried away on one performance last night, but even just from an asset point of view, having Danilo looking sharp again, this what, a 6 million transfer fee, Calvin, it's that having these players who we have spent money on starting to hit a wee bit of form again and getting their stock dragged to level back up to where it was certainly does us no harm, in terms of, it's a rinse repeat game with our signings from now on, with the model. You get a player, you sell them when they're at their highest stock as we can get them to, and then you go and restart the process. There's no harm in a game like last night, just to kind of remind people these are players who we can point to as assets, because at times early in the season, I mean, I've jokingly said that John Souttar probably was our highest possible asset because of the way he's performed for Scotland and in Europe, obviously. It's good to have these players like a Raskin, who was probably one of the original players brought in to start the model, coming back from, I'm going to guess, a plummeting transfer value with him sitting on the bench or on the doctor's bench himself. It's games like that which can make all the difference in the long run in this model.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's getting your assets on the park, allowing them to perform, giving them an environment that they can thrive in rather than hide in. That's what a lot. It's kind of seen. We've spent most of our time with our assets that we've sat on the treatment table, as you mentioned. And when you get into that position, where can you sell them to? Nobody's picking up a player that can't play more than 10 games a season. And I think potentially over the last 5, 6, 7 years, when we have had a player who is a bit of an asset with potentially Bassey, we've holded them for quite a long time. You look at Morelos, if the bids were coming in, we bought him for 1 million. Should we have sold him at his peak? potentially would have affected other things, but we could have reinvested that. You look at Kent, we let the value drive up, and it once again leaves for nothing. There's been too many of those stories over the last 7-8 years where we've had a player who has ability, has potential, and we haven't made the best of the player trading model with them. I think that's something that we need to probably accept as a fan base, that we will fall in love with a player, but they will have to go when the time's right for us as a club.
It's going to be cutthroat. I think that's the way it has to be. Again, we'll just stay on the kind of player trading side of the discussion from today. There was a question regarding academy talents that it falls into. Obviously, it can be a very useful part of our transfer business. We could do a whole other hour-long show, 2-hour-long show, Andy, on our academy, and are we seeing enough out of it? I think if we give it a couple minutes, the answer to that question from the general Rangers support will be in the comments. I again quick to mention Clement saying he has a history of bringing through players in his previous positions. I don't know if it's going to be. I don't know if I was overhyping him at some point for this, because I did mention obviously Ross McCausland coming in last season, which I know it's one player, but for Rangers, one player is one more than we usually bring through to graduate the academy, so to speak. It's hard, but I'm struggling to find a time frame for this kind of academy graduate jumping into the team. We've seen them in and around the first team fringes, but I'm not sure I've seen enough so far to be betting my house on us bringing through one or two in the near future.
No, it's something we've not done a lot of in the past. We've really struggled bringing through talent into the first team. I think sometimes rather than sit, maybe a Leon King or somebody like that on the bench as the backup or the fourth choice centre back, we've went and signed somebody that's 30-year-old and paid them 15, 20 grand. And maybe that's where the academy comes in. Maybe we need to cut the squad size a bit and let some of these young guys be our backups and our reserves. I mean, you're not going to bring through a Barry Ferguson every year, put it that way, but have we got guys we can use? Have we got guys we can, have as backup and come on in certain games? Probably. It was one of the things I think Copeland and Clement touched on today. They were asked about it near the end, and I think Copeland says they're going to undertake a review of the academy, and they'll appoint somebody in there. The problem we've got is the fruits of that aren't going to be seen for a few years. You don't just suddenly put somebody in place and suddenly players are just coming off a conveyor belt. So that's the kind of headache we've got. And I think the other thing they spoke about was obviously the B team, where they play. I think they're wanting the B team to play in somewhere in the SPFL structure, but obviously we know that there's been a lot of resistance to that, partly because there's really only two teams that stand to benefit a lot from it, one of them being us. And, the lower league experiment didn't really work. I think the level was not challenging enough for some of the young guys. And then when Zeb Jacobs came in, we've kind of played a lot of sporadic, glorified friendlies. I don't think that served the guys well either, because it just means week on week they're training, they're playing the odd game, but it's not enough for the development. They need to be playing football, competitive football, and if we could find a way to do that, I think it would be, make a big difference and give the academy much more room to succeed. Because even if you do identify the right players, if they don't have the environment to test themselves and improve, then you're never going to get anywhere anyway. And I think that goes for the first team as well. We've got to give these guys the right platform to come in and play, because, we've seen highly rated talents like Alex Lowry and Leon King in recent years, and they've been wasted for whatever reason. It just hasn't worked, whether the gap is too big, whether we expect too much, whether they're dropped out of the team too quickly, I don't know. But we definitely need to make a much better use of the academy. Otherwise, we're basically just sinking a lot of money into a very expensive white elephant that's costing us money and not producing anything.
Yes, I think you're spot on there. It's slowly becoming more and more apparent with. I mean, I've been covering a lot of the B team games this season. Some real good performances through even the Challenge Cup, for example. I know we said there about trying to find a place for them to play where it's beneficial for them in the long run, and so the Challenge Cup obviously didn't go to plan the other night. A red card, albeit, kind of hindering the process. There's been some real good head-to-heads with grown men, for guys who are 16, 17, you know, that it's a tough battle for them, but it's very, very beneficial for them in the long run. And I think contrast that to, as you said, these best v best games. I think there needs to be some assessment going on as to what we value most, as it doesn't seem to be. I think you're right. I don't want to continue to quote you, but glorified friendlies. You're not the only one I've heard say that. That's suddenly becoming a bit of the opinion with that. From a games program which was touted with a lot of, oh, this can work for us, this can be good for us, it's good for the players individually. But I think, as you stated, as the gaffer and our director of football recruitment and sporting director now, has said that there should be a kind of overall assessment into the academy. Let's kind of talk about where we go from here then. Obviously, this is our annual meeting, so this time next year, where would we be? Obviously, a new CEO, we have a new date, we have a date set for him to come in, I should say, and a chairman not too far away. A lot of talk about who that was potentially, or who one of the leading candidates was in the week just past there. I'm starting to see a bit more positivity, and again, I'm trying my best not to be clouded by the judgment of one 6-0 game, but it certainly makes you reanalyse your position. And I think just with a wee bit less negativity, and I think that's where that 6-0 game comes in, seeing it with a wee bit more of a clearer mind and not so negative, there is maybe starting to have a pathway that we are following that will lead us in the right direction. Calvin, I'll bring you in there. How were you feeling when you stepped out from Armadillo today after hearing all the plans for the future?
I think that's the biggest thing, is you're wanting all these jigsaw pieces to actually come in now. Like, we've had too many uncertainties of somebody's coming in at this date, falls through. Somebody else is coming in, falls through. So when all these kind of power positions are all filled, it does bring a bit more positivity, because you can look to where can we develop in the future. Whereas recently it's just been, where are we going to go week to week? What's the news story? It's time for the news stories to disappear and for these contracts and jobs in the boardroom to be filled. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's having the positivity of knowing what's there rather than what could be there.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to go ahead and say give you headlines if there's anybody wanting to think we're going overboard, but I think it does sound, again, comparing to where we were maybe before the start of the meeting this morning, Andy, a bit more reassurance, which in quite a negative, vibe going around the place the last couple of months, certainly is a nice, refreshing change of pace.
Yeah, I think last night's win and the fact that we're seeing changes at board level now is perhaps giving us something to sort of grasp onto a wee bit if we're wanting to be optimistic and positive. I'm a financial guy, so I sit back and look at the figures and still concerned there, because we lost a lot of money last season. We'll lose money again this season. We've had a net transfer spend. We don't have the COVID insurance claim to come in this season. The wage bill has come down. That's good. That's going to be one of the things that's key going forward. But if we're not, to come back briefly to the trading model, if we're still not selling players in January or the summer, how are we funding further improvements? How are we funding rebuilds? And that's going to be the question, I think, as we get towards those windows, is actually, have we got the money to spend, or where does it come from? Are we taking on more loans? Do we need investor equity to come in? So, there's still that in the background, but I think if we want to be positive and take something from it, I think if we can get the board in place and the structure in place that they spoke about today, I think that can make a big difference, because that's the kind of backbone that's going to underpin our success or otherwise in the next couple of years and onwards. So getting that in and on the pitch, if we can continue to build on the Kilmarnock result and some of the European results, get some of the young players playing regular and improving as we go on, then that's the stuff that will take us forward. And I hope, as we're sitting here next year talking about improvement and getting better and challenging for things or winning things, because that's where we need to be. Realistically, it's a short time frame to do that, but as I said earlier, if we're moving in the right direction, the fans will back it, as they have done over the last few years. We just need to see. We've basically been on a slide for two and a bit years. That has to change and start going back upwards again and taking us back towards where we should be as a club at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. The slide. I think we've only got the upwards direction to go. I think that's maybe one of the kind of leading points towards my positivity. Which again, it's a sad reality, but that's where it is. But as I said, the only way is up from here. Yeah, that'll wrap us up for our review on the AGM today. Thank you, obviously, to my two brilliant guests, guys who attended today. Andy, thank you for your insight and the numbers and your knowledge. Thank you for coming on tonight, mate.
No, a pleasure. Thanks for having me as always.
And also, we lost him, we found him, and he was fine for the rest of the evening. Calvin, thank you for coming on again, bud.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Quick thank you to our sponsors again, as you see on the bottom of your screen: Rhino Express, Clydeview's Joinery, and Athill Industrial Solutions, CSD Air Conditioning, Black Rooster, and Art of Gold. Thank you. And also thank you to anyone listening back, all the people that put their comments in live tonight. Thank you for your company, and be sure to drop a like, a subscribe. There'll be a lot more content on the channel this week. The Friday show, we get the Sunday show, me and Calvin, we're starting to make a bit of a routine of this now. So yeah, lots of good Ranger stuff coming your way. So be sure to check it out. But until next time, thank you very much for joining me, and have a good night.
Four Lads podcast is sponsored by Rhino Express, Clydeview's Joinery, Athill Industrial Solutions Limited, and CSD Air Conditioning, along with Art of Gold. Thank you for listening or watching the podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show.